Have you ever felt like your characters' backstories have been holding you back? You craft your amazing story, you've got this broad, expansive future lined up for your players, and feel like perhaps their backstories are like more of a cage than a springboard? What if there was a better way to grow your players' personas in your game without being tied to their past? Now, backstories are the heart of storytelling. They give your characters motive, connections. But in role-playing games, backstories can sometimes feel like a set of handcuffs because in that case, the players are building the story, locking their characters into choices that may not make sense as your story evolves. Today, we're exploring why this happens and how the Nikos enjoyment process offers a groundbreaking solution. The problem with traditional backstories is that they sometimes can become, they sometimes are formed statically, restrictive, and disconnected from the story from the beginning as it unfolds. Let's look at some of those common issues. The first we're going to talk about is the character's history is building into a fiction that perhaps the players haven't got the full picture of, and therefore they've written pages and pages of backstory only for most of it to be unusable, or that perhaps clashes directly with the direction that the campaign is intending to go. This is, of course, an issue that we need to fix. The next thing we have to worry about is inflexibility. A rigid backstory can lock your location, your characters into behaviors and goals that simply are not going to make sense as the story progresses, and so they are too rigid and too immovable. The next thing you have to worry about is how relevant they are to the story. Sometimes the backstory can feel like a completely separate story, failing to connect with the current narrative and making it impossible for you to bring them into coherence without feeling futile or stupid. Arguably, the players, of course, have established what they want to have in their story through the backstory and have made it therefore difficult for you to include them. And when you are unable to do this, then the players will naturally want to disengage, because if the backstory that they've built doesn't align with your story, you're either going to have to make shortcuts on their behalf, or you're going to disconnect them from the story altogether, because they're going to retreat back into the elements of the backstory that they brought with them. Ultimately, though, even if you get your players to do the work of trying to acquiesce to the story that you're building, it creates overload because you're now trying to incorporate the very delicate and elaborate backstories they built into the campaign without derailing or altering the course that you intended for them. These challenges not only limit your ability as a game master to run the game, but it also undermines the very storytelling experience that the players might get from it. This is where Nikos enjoyment paradigm changes everything. Instead of considering a static backstory, the Nikos enjoyment process invites you to enjoin the persona. That is to say, the players come into the story with you only being given snippets of what their backstory is intending to be, but without any interaction with them. What this does is provides you a way out in your mechanism that really helps the players to understand their role in the story, because they literally grow into it. Now, how does that happen? Well, first of all, instead of having a fixed past, a defined past, the personas are given an arbitrary origin point at which they interact and become the persona who's already living in that in your ever-evolving world. That means that their backstory has yet to be discovered even by them, and therefore they are able to provide you input on what they would like to accomplish, and you're able to interact with the pieces that are available and thereby develop a growth-focused design. The players grow naturally in the system, and with that, therefore, you can direct and allow for skills, motivations, and relationships to develop organically within the game that helps them fulfill what they are hoping to get from the history of their persona, but also provides you with the mechanisms to be able to make them organically connected to your game. They're not pre-written scripts and predefined facts, but instead things that you can ingrain into the story fluidly. This process of narrative integration, therefore, allows for the world building of your world to be more smoothly connected to the players, and it allows that a deeper connection into the larger narrative, which makes your story relevant and their persona's story relevant into the campaign itself, and therefore becomes part and whole of the same thing. In other words, you'll both be rowing in the same direction, as it were. It's also more of a collaborative development. The injunction or the enjoyment encourages the players to collaborate with the game master and blend that character development backwards as well as forwards seamlessly into the world's ongoing events. Perhaps they didn't know they had a brother in this town, or perhaps they were unaware that there was a love interest still waiting for them in another county. If they didn't have a backstory built into that, but they wanted it, then you are able to weave that into the story and make it make sense. And then ultimately this allows for incredible player freedom, because if they start with a role that they have already enjoyed, they're free to display their personality, or even to develop and grow without feeling being trapped by the history that they had originally intended to bring in. By eliminating the writing of the backstory, therefore, you're giving them the freedom to explore and discover who they really are. This approach transforms the character creation process into a shared journey, ensuring that your persons are never at odds with the unfolding story. Now, the most important takeaway here is that the enjoyment focuses instead of static pasts on a dynamic future. The persona's stories develop when you step them into their role, not when you write a novel in the advance. Not when they write a novel about the past life in advantage of that. The magic of Nykos is that in every direction, every decision, every success or failure shapes who they become. You're not bound by that rigid backstory, but you're empowered by a living one, a dynamic one that they discover that helps them to evolve the story. This creates a character that feels alive, adaptable, and deeply connected to the world about them. Now, to recap, traditional backstories are functional limits to your growth because they cut off, figuratively, half the life of the persona. The character's pre-play environment is not there for you to explore or investigate. You can't do, or it's difficult to do, vignettes of things that happened in the past when they are written in stone. Instead, having this more fluid understanding of the persona and their role, it gives the characters the opportunity to remain not only relevant and immersed in the story, but they become engaging tools because they are looking for the mechanism. It's really a game changer for role players looking to connect with their characters in new and exciting ways. Now, have you ever struggled with a backstory that didn't work for you or didn't work for your player? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you're curious about the Nykos enjoyment process, check out NycosRPG.com for a PDF copy of the Nykos Masterbook Fast Play PDF, which is available at NycosRPG.com/fastplay, and there's a link down below that'll tell you how to get there in particular. And check out our next video, which should be up here in the corner. I don't know if it's visible or not, but the point of this is that your characters in your game are going to grow naturally even as the story advances. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you for subscribing or following. I mean, I really, really appreciate you being here. So, with that, I will now